Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to another episode of Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd.
Thanks, Brad. As a business and healthcare law firm, we have some amazing dumpster fire stories. A dumpster fire essentially means a mismanaged situation that results in utter disaster. I think the definition should be changed to say a dumpster fire is the year 2020.
Absolutely, I agree with you on that. And today's episode, we're going to talk about a dumpster fire for a client who was charmed into investing in a dental deal that went bad to worse. And years later, this fire has not been completely extinguished.
Well, speaking of, Brad, do you remember when the packs of gum would say 9 out of 10 dentists say that gum is good for your teeth?
That literally had nothing to do with what we're just talking about. But yes, I do remember often seeing that. And that one dentist, why did he or she hold out? Do they not? What do they have against gum? Do you know?
I have no idea. I chew the same gum today. In fact, I had to look at my gum and see that the message is adjusted. They've gone away from the 9 out of 10 to now it just says chewing gum after eating and drinking cleans and protects the teeth. But when going through all this reminded me of growing up, and I really remember my mom telling me that if I drank too much Coke, it would rot my teeth.
Okay, how does drinking Coke rot your teeth? Actually, I'm not sure I want to know. I want to know if 9 out of 10 dentists agree that Coke rots your teeth.
Well, based on the pictures that came up when I Googled whether Coke is bad for your teeth, I'm guessing it's closer to 10 out of 10. I can't unsee some of the images of decay that popped up.
Well, maybe you should start chewing gum after you drink Coke. All right, I want to talk about, stop talking about dental hygiene. Michael, let's talk today about our dumpster fire story.
Okay, well, many years ago, I had a physician call me excited about the opportunity to invest in a dental practice. That's right. Our doctors always looking for deals, and it's not the first time we've had our doctors invest in dental deals and vice versa. This dental practice already had 10 plus locations, had a great brand identity. I instantly knew the name of the dental practice and was excited to look at this opportunity.
Yeah, I remember getting involved on the front end in this. This investment was for a DSO with a vision to scale the business for a multiplier, with eventually with an exit strategy for a huge private equity deal to buy them all out.
Yeah, this was the beginning of the heyday for huge private equity deals in the dental market. Brad, you used the term DSO. I think that's the first vocabulary word for the day. What is a DSO?
Sure. Sorry. So DSO is a dental support organization. This is a model that allows non-dentists to own dental practices, or more to the point, legally tap into the flow of funds of a dental practice. In reality, a DSO is just really the back office of the business managing these dental practices. The DSO owns a brand name, does the marketing, the leasing, the accounting, the staffing, and all these other functions that a dentist would need for running their dental practice. The DSO typically ends up capturing some profits from this dental practice through which is known as a dental support agreement via these management fees paid to the DSO from that dental practice. But to be clear, the DSO does not own the dental practice.
Yeah, and I want to add to that too. The DSO world has really developed. I mean, DSOs nationally have their own lobbyists, their own trade association, and for those who can't quite picture what we're talking about, if you see a chain dental office, and no matter where you are, there is one, that likely is a DSO. So this investment opportunity presented to our client was to invest into the DSO. The founder of the DSO was a dentist who also owned the dental practices that were being managed.
Yeah, and this is a pretty common scenario. For a DSO to work, you must have a dentist own these dental practices. And it's common for this same dentist that may have some ownership or significant ownership in the DSO too. And we've helped many dentists and DSOs set these up over the years, so we had a good flavor for this, and tell our audience about this founding dentist that was so key to this particular model.
Oh, man. I don't know quite where to start. We could spend an hour telling stories about what we learned eventually about the founder. Let's call him Dr. Nose.
All right. Dr. Nose seems like a terrible name for a dentist. We are talking about people and their teeth.
Well, I've told you before, my dad wanted me to be a doctor until I took ninth grade anatomy, but that's not why we're going to call him Dr. Nose. It's not my failure to understand what a dentist does.
Good. Okay.
Well, Dr. Nose liked a different kind of Coke than what we talked about earlier, Brad. The good news is that the Coke he liked did not rot his teeth. The bad news is that it did end up eventually costing Dr. Nose his dental license and destroying his business.
So he preferred Coke products over Pepsi products?
If Pepsi is an analogy for meth, then I don't know. I've never heard of him drinking, quote, Pepsi, Brad. But yes, I did. He did enjoy Coke.
Okay. So blind taste test. He preferred Coke products. All right. Well, it wasn't always chaos. I remember being quite excited at the beginning. In fact, our client had so many great stories about going to Vegas with Dr. Nose. I'm not sure we could actually even talk about it, not doing this investment, even if we tried.
Yeah. If you're an attorney trying to help a client on a deal and he's already been on Vegas trips with the person he's going to invest in, you've got an uphill battle.
Yep.
Our client swore he never saw Dr. Nose using any Coke products when he was on these Vegas trips. There was more than one. But from the stories about private planes, clubs, casinos, and all the debauchery that implies, there seemed to be plenty of distractions to our client even noticing whether Dr. Nose was partaking in Coke products or Pepsi products.
True. And we could get into greater details, but as to these Vegas stories, but I think we'd end up getting a massive explicit rating for this podcast, and the audience probably would not believe half the things we would say that really ended up happening in Vegas and what happened outside of Vegas. And so we'll just kind of keep moving forward, but a lot. And Michael, we actually met Dr. Nose a few times, and he was extremely likable. He was outgoing, charming, beaming with confidence, had a very robust way in which he carried himself. More importantly, I remember being pleasantly surprised when I reviewed the investor packet for our client. It was professionally done. It addressed many of the concerns that we would have had if we had addressed it or reviewed it. And it was typical things that we want to see in a private offering as it relates to a DSO model or arrangement.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, Dr. Nose was likable, and you could see why, he had that charm about him. And to your point, I remember, we had the typical questions, and there was some negotiation on the deal, but the investor documents, the ownership documents, even the financials didn't create any red flags. And our client invested in a pretty significant amount. As the aftermath of the ink drying, we started to hear whispers. It would be whispers of frustration that there was a cash shortage, or there need to be another round, or, talk a little bit more, Brad, about some of the other things we were hearing.
Yeah, I mean, they just weren't hitting their financial targets. These new locations that our clients had spent significant money in were suffering, actually losing money. And the dentists that were supposed to be helping run those locations kept leaving.
Yeah, and for context, the growth plan for a DSO model works when the DSO can build out a location and then basically go hire a dentist to treat the patients at the particular location. We hear them say, you create the entire setup and even put the butts in the seats, and you go employ a dentist to pay him to come in and actually provide the treatments. Dr. Nose was mostly running the DSO and not treating patients at this point. Well, at least that was what the message was to the investors.
That was the message. But then the lawsuit started, and we had vendors and dentists, and they started suing the DSO for missing payments and other issues. And then Dr. Nose ended up getting personally sued for a bunch of really crazy allegations. So it started to unwind pretty quickly.
Yeah, it started getting dark fast.
Yes.
And we would start to hear whispers of Coke products. We started noticing a trend where there were people that really hated Dr. No's out there. And so it was, again, in retrospect, a good learning lesson. It was amazing that people were either in Camp Dr. No's and loved him, or people that, swore him off and would never talk to him again, or in many cases, as we were learning, were starting to sue him. And I think the final straw was the dental board investigation that started alleging substance abuse. And this cloud hung over the business. I mean, Dr. No's was the face, even though he was on the DSO side, he was on the dental side, but the brand was so associated with Dr. No's. And eventually, as that investigation was going on at the dental board level, Dr. No's decided to give up his dental license rather than comply with the dental program that was put in place.
Yeah, this is such a dumpster fire. With Dr. No's is no longer a dentist, which means that it's required for a DSO model. Our client had spent significant funds. He had read up a couple of times into this DSO. So everyone, let's hold our breath and we'll try to sniff out the legal issues after the break.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Welcome back to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd. You're still here. Michael, we just heard a great, interesting story about Dr. No's, who basically snorted away our client's money. How did he do it?
Well, apparently, Brad, Coke is expensive, and you need cash for that. And we quickly started learning that the cash problems of the DSO were not a coincidence to the enjoyment of Coke that our client, the Dr. No's was enjoying. And so we started trying to figure out what was going on, and our client was trying to figure out how to save his investment. I mean, Dr. No's was off the grid at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started looking into things, and we found a couple of different ways that Dr. No's was siphoning cash out of the business. We found that he outsourced a lot of the ancillary services to to entities that he owned and never disclosed. So, for example, the DSO may pay a premium for a dental implant to a dental implant company that, coincidentally, this dental implant company was owned by Dr. No's. We found a handful of companies like this. They were never disclosed. They showed up on the financials as just, run-of-the-mill expenses like you would expect. And even the amounts of money going through there were not enough to create a flag. But over time, I guess it supplied plenty of Coke products. He also was periodically showing up to locations to perform implant cases. Dr. No's would have the patients write a check directly to Dr. No's instead of to the practice.
Yeah, so for context, for those not following what Michael's talking about, these implant cases are extremely expensive. You're talking about upwards of $50,000. And besides being directly compensated for services that he was rendering, ultimately, these funds were supposed to go to the DSO. And then we started learning that Dr. No's would sell off portions of these particular practices to those dentists that were working those chairs. To be clear, many of these times, or almost every single time, the assets were actually owned by the DSO, not by Dr. No's. And in addition, they were secured by banks that the DSO had taken out loans on. But these dentists thought they were getting great deals because Dr. No's would either convince the local dentist just to pay them like hey, how about $50,000 and you can own a 20 or 30% of this company or more. And some of them are like, oh, well, will you sign an agreement? And they say, sure. And he'd sign whatever's in front of him because he actually didn't have the ability to sell anything.
And we actually had a couple examples of people not signing anything and just writing a check for a quote deposit. And just pause for a minute and imagine how charming Dr. Nose must have been to be able to convince someone just to blindly sign something and even more blindly write a check. It's crazy.
Yep.
So we talked about this in other episodes this season. Bad people do bad things. What could have been done differently here?
Yeah, I think first it's important to recognize the risk that goes with investing in a business where essentially it's controlled by, in this case, one person, Dr. Nose. These situations where if the founder goes down, the business goes down. The documents traditionally planned for investor protections if the founder dies or disabled. It's less traditional, but important to incorporate into deal structure or contingencies in the event the investment opportunity it starts to changing in the fact that the founder is no longer with them.
Yeah, and you know,
and more importantly, he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, I was, you know, this probably falls in the bank of traditional, but you know, there's, you know, reps and warranties that go into what he's saying, but there's, you know, also, you know, it sounds like you're talking about not meeting financial benchmarks and, you know, as I said, untrue representations.
Yeah, we spoke in a prior episode about the protections that you can get from reps and warrants. So those are very important. An additional strategy would be to structure the investment as a debt that can be later converted to equity. This creates a path for the investors to have security interests and foreclose when benchmarks, those financial ones that you just mentioned, are not being met.
And what I like about it is that it typically gives the investor a priority to get paid back ahead of the owners until the investor makes the decision to actually convert the debt into equity.
Exactly. That goes back to something our client struggled with at the beginning. Our client was ready to write a check after being charmed by Dr. Nose. He didn't have the appetite for time and energy it would take to structure this investment. Given the amount of money involved, there was a real opportunity for a client to have done this.
Yeah, I want to circle back to something you said a few minutes ago. You spoke about the risk that goes with investing in a business controlled by, like you said in this case, by one person. We had Dr. Nose, who was the face, and he was, you know, the one person. And there's a human element to preventing or identifying how to mitigate your risk, even when everything looks right. The fast talking, charming, hurry up to get this done founder should kind of in of itself create a red flag and make you hit the pause button. It's not quite the "it's too good to be true" adage, but it's similar.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And the investment documents held up. If in the sense that you're being charmed into a deal and you have a founder in control of the whole thing, I would be more inclined to push for some more shifts, kind of like you said, on deal protections that we just discussed.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been really easy if we would have had our client and were able to convince our client to just slow down and not be so like this is the greatest thing ever. And even having a debt converting to equity type structure, he could have taken over long before this fire was burning like crazy and almost out of control. Not almost, it was out of control. But Brad, did the story have a happy ending?
No, it did not. Unfortunately, like you said, this season we will have stories without these happy endings. You know, not only did our client lose the investment and the multiple times he re-anteed into, this is one of those deals that where there's a lot of aftermath. Our phone started ringing off the hook with other attorneys who had heard about what was up to with the Dr. No, so they were asking us if we had any inside information. We had the banks calling us because they were trying to find out some more information that if we had anything on Dr. No's. And finally, last but certainly not least, more recently, when I say recently, pretty darn recently, the FBI called me up and ask me for some information on these transactions. So every time our client thinks he gets out, he gets getting sucked back in. Michael, any final thoughts?
Well, the dumpster fire season as a whole is a good reminder of the human element when measuring the risk of a situation. Everything may make sense and worthy of a calculated business risk, but you interject a bad actor and it completely tilts the risk scale.
Yes, and remember, kids, Coke can rot more than your teeth. Please join us next week when we talk about embezzlement from the top. Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe, make sure to give us a 5-star rating, and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.